Good day, everyone. This is John Kogan, the CEO of Proformative, the online community for corporate finance, accounting, treasury, and related professionals. I would like to welcome everyone to today's webinar, The Need for Speed, How to Get Data and Make Great Business Decisions Fast. CFOs and related finance, accounting, and treasury leaders often have too little and too much information at the same time. What they need is the data to make great business decisions fast. Finance leaders tell us they're not getting enough or timely enough information from their enterprise systems. Yet simultaneously, they're drowning in data from their customers, suppliers, and websites with even more information in the offing. Unfortunately, the tools that support great decision-making have been struggling to keep pace with the flood of data. So how does the finance executive of 2012 sift through an exponentially growing pile of internal and external data to determine the best way to integrate and channel information to the right decision makers at the right time while maintaining appropriate controls over critical enterprise data? In today's webinar, we will explore some of the current trends in information management and enabling technologies, how these are impacting the finance organization. We'll discuss some examples of what companies are doing and identify areas you may be able to take back to your organization. Before we get going, we've got a few items. First off, we'd like to thank Baker Tilly, our wonderful sponsor today. Not only are they steeped in the information we'll be covering in today's webinar, but it's through their support that educational webinars like this and everything we do at Proformative, including the website itself, is completely free to our users and ad-free. So that's a wonderful thing. We thank Baker Tilly, and we thank them for helping us pull together content and speakers for today's event. So thank you to Baker Tilly. Next up, a couple of housekeeping items real quickly. Well, actually, before that, a quick welcome to Proformative. We're the largest and fastest growing online community of corporate finance, accounting, treasury, and related professionals. We have a very vibrant online community with hundreds of thousands of users and folks exchanging knowledge. That's all free. It's all noise-free. We don't even have ads on the site. It's just a wonderful place to get answers for your various questions. And heaven knows we all have questions every day in our jobs. It's just a great place to get answers. So check it out at Proformative.com. A few notes on today's event. First off, today's presentation is already posted at Proformative.com/resources, and by tomorrow we will send everyone an email with links to both the soft copy of the presentation and to the recording of this webinar so that you can keep it for posterity, share it out to colleagues, etc. But the presentation is actually already available. If you go to Proformative.com/resources, you'll see it right there at the top. This is a CPE credit event. In order to get CPE credit, we will be asking 3 polling questions during the event. If you're here for CPE credit, you have to answer those, but even if you're not here for credit, we would appreciate your giving us 15 seconds during those brief breaks and actually answering these questions. They're statistical in nature, and I think you'll find the results interesting. And what we do at the beginning of the Q&A section of today's event is we'll turn these polling questions around and show everyone where our audience stands. And it's always great to see that data from your peers who are also on today's webinar. Next, please do ask questions. We have a Q&A section at the end of this webinar. It will be the last 10 to 15 minutes, depending on the timing. And it's your chance to ask questions from folks who are genuinely steeped in this content subject matter. So you can ask your questions anytime during the event. If you'll take just one moment and take a peek at your GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see that there's a little section there entitled Questions. Feel free to ask away, and we'll do our best to get to your questions during the Q&A section. Finally, you will be asked to take a short survey at the end of the webinar, 60 seconds or less, and we'd love to know what you think. Your feedback helps us get better every time, so we greatly appreciate it. Also, if you would like to be connected directly with either of today's speakers after the event, we're happy to help make that direct connection if you have further questions to ask. And we make that really easy on the survey form. You just click the button next to the speaker's name that you want to be connected to, and we're happy to make that happen. Okay, a couple quick learning objectives, which I won't go through one at a time here, but basically at the end of the day, we want you to be better informed about how to gather and effectively utilize information at your company, especially given the flood of information coming all of our ways through all of our various sensors throughout the enterprise, whether it's ERP, websites, CRM, you name it. So that's what we'd love to be able to help everyone with today. And to help us get there today, it's my pleasure to introduce our two speakers. First, I'd like to introduce Michael Husenek, who's a Director of Business in the Business Analytics Group at Baker Tilly. Michael is a Director in the Consulting Group of Baker Tilly Virchow Krause, LLP. He is a CPA with over 15 years of experience with corporate performance management, business intelligence, and analytics. Michael's primary focus today is on the modernization of client analytical solution offerings, and specifically the design and implementation of unstructured information and big data solutions. Joining Michael today will be Kevin Coonan, who is a manager also in the Business Analytics Group at Baker Tilly. Kevin is an experienced manager in Baker Tilly's analytics practice and has over 10 years in management consulting. His experience focuses on applying analytics technology and also includes custom systems development, IT strategy, IT assessment, project management, and operations improvement in a variety of industries. He is currently engaged with a major healthcare insurer developing a custom-built large-scale claims processing solution which utilizes inline analytics and business intelligence. So with that, great welcome to Michael and Kevin, and I'll let you take it away.
All right, great. Thanks, John. Before we get started, I just want to ask a question. I mean, is it just me, or are things just, a little bit chaotic or a little bit crazy out there? Every time I open the news, it's something new, or, jobs are coming back, now they're not, now they are again, consumers are spending, that's up, no wait, now it's not again, Europe's in trouble, it's in worse trouble, or maybe it's not as bad as we thought. For me specifically, a whole host of new technologies that I'm personally just trying to stay on top of. I think if we took one of those CPU polling questions that John mentioned now, and asked if you were overwhelmed or if you're uncertain about what to do next, but I think I know what the answer would be. And that's really what we're going to talk about today. We're going to dive into some of those changing market dynamics, what's different out there, some of the challenges that our companies are facing, and how they need to adjust. Companies that are doing well at it, and also companies that have struggled with it. And we'll look at that a little bit more in detail. And then Kevin's going to talk about the era of big data and really using information and some of the new pieces of information that are out there as a competitive advantage and how you go about doing that. And then really in this era of big data, rethinking your analytics capabilities. What's new, what's out there, what should you use, what shouldn't you use. We'll talk a little bit about how you go about doing that. And then really hone in on, the role of finance in driving and managing these opportunities. Like John said, I'm a CPA. I've got experience in the finance realm, really uniquely positioned to take a leadership role in this area. So we'll dive into that as well. So what do we see that's causing some of this chaos? What are some of the major pressures that organizations are facing? And there's a lot of different ones. What we find to be four common pressures are macroeconomic forces, new and disruptive technologies rapidly getting introduced into the marketplace, really shifting and changing competitive landscape, and also just new demographics in the workforce. These four things are really common across all the organizations that we work with. So what do we mean by each of those? When you look at macroeconomic forces, that's things like energy and new energy. Things like rising gas prices. What's that doing to your effect on your supply chain, to effect on delivery routes? What's that doing to, consumer purchasing patterns? Things like government regulation. How do we need to adjust to that? Just the economy in general. It's a very global economy now, very interconnected, lots of uncertainty. So it's things like that. Largely things that are out of our control, but that really do have a material impact on the business. The second force is rapid new technology and disruptive technology. So what do we mean by that? Well, that's things like mobility, and Apple and all the different sort of applications that are out there, creating lots of new touch points to the customer, new ways that we go about business across a wide variety of market sectors. Things that Google are doing, one thing that's come out recently is Google Goggles, so the ability using your mobile devices to scan barcodes and do comparative shopping in store. We're starting to see that take hold now. different enterprise collaboration software, so how people are communicating internally within your organization. Things like Hadoop and how you're harnessing the power of big data. Glassdoor.com, really creating a 360-degree view of your company, giving your recruits and really your employees different insights into your company. Whole host of new cloud technologies, and a whole host of new mobile technologies to go along with it. And that's one of the big trends that we're seeing is really around cloud and mobility. This is one of those every kind of 15, 20-year things that really come together and create new platforms for growth. So those two in combined, we're seeing a lot of growth around. And what that's really giving rise to is just a shifting competitive landscape. So we're seeing a lot of things happen there. So what are some examples of that? Well, that's companies like Netflix and Redbox really coming in and putting a lot of pressure on companies like Blockbuster. Companies like Amazon leveraging the internet to put a lot of pressure on borders. And now we're seeing companies like Best Buy also, struggling. So some big companies, in big trouble, due to some of these macroeconomic forces and new technologies that are coming into play. And the fourth one, that we find a lot of challenges around is really your workforce and some of the dynamics there. So what that covers is around, how do you find the right people to do the right job, given that your business models are shifting, the competition's shifting, what's really in play there. So that's really three different factors. So we've got the millennials coming in, who are they, what's important to them, different set of expectations, different expectations around how they want to work, how they want to collaborate. Then you've got the baby boomers, due to some of that economic uncertainty, staying in the workplace longer. And then all that mixed in with Generation X. So three different demographics, all with different expectations around how they want to use technology, what they're able to do with technology, different expectations about how they want to work, different insights into the clients, really struggling with how to pull the people lever within an organization and really apply the right people to the right jobs that you're going after. So, those forces really are, the major pressures that we're seeing across the organization. And so the question really is, how does the company in the middle manage all these questions? And it's hard. There's no question. It's really hard. But there are some common characteristics that we've found in organizations that are successful. But before we get into those, let's go into put this into some real terms and look at some real companies and what they've done when faced with those pressures or opportunities. So we've got these rapid changes, and we're going to look at it across really two disruptive technologies. The first is the internet, and the second is the cloud. Everybody's talking about the cloud right now. So we'll look at it and what it's done to Blockbuster, for your entertainment needs, Best Buy for consumer electronics, and Borders for books. So very strong companies before the internet came along. And then the internet came along. And a whole host of new companies, came into play then. So you had companies like Netflix, which completely, disregarded the retail outlet, and went to an online ordering process and took a very large portion of that market share from Blockbuster. Then you had Apple coming in with iTunes, it's actually downloading entertainment directly to a mobile device, so the start of kind of the mobile generation. Redbox, another disruptive technology, a different point of sale system, also coming in and taking a pretty significant size market share from Blockbuster. Companies like Amazon, that leverage the internet to really be an online book retailer, but then quickly morphed into really just an online retail. So not only putting pressure on Borders, but also putting pressure on companies like Best Buy. And then the cloud came along, and then remember, this is all in the space of, 10, 15 years max. You've got the cloud coming in. So now you've got, cable providers getting into the entertainment space with on-demand and streaming videos and DVD players. So really putting pressure on Netflix, a company that has done really well in a short period of time, but now facing their own pressures, also putting pressure on iTunes. Apple coming in and saying, okay, we're going to redesign, what we're doing and start to get more of this entertainment sector. And then Amazon, continuing to evolve and actually getting into the mobility space with their own mobile device. So really two, very disruptive technologies causing a lot of change within the marketplace in a short period of time. And so the question with that is, how do you navigate it? How do you navigate all that complexity? How are you more on the Amazon side versus the Borders side? And really what we've found is the answer to that is organizations need to become what we call dynamic enterprises. They're the only companies that can really successfully and consistently navigate this complexity. which leads us to the next question. Okay, so what's a dynamic enterprise, right? What are the characteristics that they share to be able to succeed in this rapid pace of change? And there's really 4 that we're finding, all of which have an information component to it. So the first is they're very good at continually scanning and monitoring the, both internally within their company and externally. So, what are the new technologies that are out there? What is the competitive landscape looking like? Who's new on the scene? Who's kind of fading away? What are the macroeconomic forces that we care about? What's important to our workforce? What are they saying? How do we need to adjust that? Very good at that scanning capability. The second one is continually assessing the changing conditions of the enterprise. So with this rapid pace of change, what's working, what's not working, what do we need to change? Are our business models still relevant? Very good at looking at themselves in the mirror. And then really good at designing and testing and rolling out at a pretty quick pace new adaptations of their business model. So the company that I like to kind of highlight here is Redbox. That actually started, which I didn't know this, by funding from McDonald's. So McDonald's, very good at scanning, right, understanding that there's a new retail point of sales technology. So how can we leverage that? It started with food kiosks, which was their first adaptation, but didn't really work that well. So then they quickly rolled into a couple of new iterations and eventually clicked on the DVD space. And then in the space of about 5 years, was able to capture about 36% of the market share. I was reading some stat where 68% of Americans live within a 5-mile drive of Redbox. So, really good at harnessing these 4 capabilities. And if you think about it, there really is an information and analytics component to each one of those. And really the first 2 and the third is where they're most heavily placed. So I think we've got a polling question now, but then we're going to turn it over to Kevin, who's going to dive into that a little bit deeper and talk about information and big data.
Great. Thank you very much, Michael. So we have the first of our 3 polling questions right now, which I'd like to go ahead and put out in front of you. Once again, if you're here for CPE credits, you do need to answer these questions. But even if you're not, I appreciate you taking 10 or 15 seconds to take a quick look at this and answer. And as I mentioned at the when we get into the Q&A session at the end of today's webinar, we'll go ahead and turn these around so we can see how we all voted. This question is, which of the following major functions of an organization have the most difficulty leveraging information? That's, of course, from our perspective. The folks on the line are finance, accounting, and treasury folks by and large. So we get visibility into all these organizations, probably very unique visibility. So be interested to see what people think. We'll leave this open for another 5 seconds. Get the last few votes in, and then we'll go ahead and hop back in. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close that one down now. I'm going to get us over to the next slide, and Kevin, please take us away.
Thank you, John. So in this next section, we're going to talk a little bit about the world of data and the challenges that come with it. So this kind of tsunami analogy might be a little cliche and cheesy, but literally there is a ton of data out there. And the first challenge is volume. And the volume problem is really nothing new. It's been around for a while. Companies have been working through it. And really, I think mostly they met that challenge. But the interesting part is just how fast this data volume is increasing. So if you look at the Google's Eric Schmidt's comment, we create as much information in 2 days as we did up until 2003. And that's a dated comment from last year. So I guess the takeaway here is it's not just that there's a lot of data, it's that the amount of data is increasing, and it's increasing at a greater rate every year. And then I think if yesterday's challenge was volume, the new challenges are really the variety, the velocity, and the volatility of the data that's out there. So with variety, the data, 80% of all new data is going to come from non-traditional, unstructured forms like Twitter, blogs, web streaming, mobile information. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Velocity, the data never turns off. Social media is 24/7. Market events and things are happening real time. And then there's volatility. So beyond the new data sources, the data itself is changing. So no one tells you in one of the descriptive fields in a Twitter feed changes. So even the data itself is changing. So the key takeaway here is, having a plan to address the challenges that the new data will bring. And in fact, most organizations that we're working with are dealing with those issues. So to expand on the variety component of data, what are the data sources that are out there? So it starts with the kind of core internal data that your firm systems generate every day. So these are things that should be familiar to all of you on the call. These are data that comes out of your ERP system, NetSuite, SAP, Oracle, your general ledger system. It's also your customer relationship management system, so Salesforce.com, which has information about your customer contacts or history of business transactions. It's also your human resources data, so that's basic HR information, but it's recruiting data, employee skills and capabilities, training data, and then of course point of service data. So this is at the cash register, reporting what customers bought and what time they bought it. All of that is key information, and all firms are really using this data in some capacity. And many firms have significant business intelligence systems to collect and analyze it. But and companies have also gone to lengths to merge this data with financial systems and financial data to gain insights on what drives costs, revenue, etc. The next data sources we're going to talk about, though, are these kind of new world data sources. So these are typically unstructured, and the goal here, and you're going to hear this theme throughout the webinar, is how to merge the unstructured, the new data sources with the traditional structured data sources like ERP to paint a fuller picture of what's going on. So what are some of these? One is Yelp, Facebook, so external social media. Poor online reviews, bad Facebook reputation can affect sales and ability to acquire talent. Customer reviews on products and services are all over the place. So most customer complaints are going unanswered, but they don't need to be. So also interesting that even companies which were traditionally business to business are starting to need to pay more attention to consumer-based data and consumer-based sites. So for example, we're working with a large healthcare insurance company here in Chicago. And traditionally, they've marketed to corporate groups. So the company that I work for, we buy healthcare as a package, as a group. But with some changes in the market and also the Affordable Care Act, it's much more likely that this healthcare insurance company is going to have to market to consumer, the consumer channel. They're going to have to really start listening to what people are saying about their insurance on Facebook and on Twitter and on Yelp, and knowing that their product offerings and their services are, doing what they need to do. We've also got financial data. This exists right now, but there's so much more of it that's coming out all the time in different ways to get this information. This is pricing information on interest rates, commodities, financial instruments, which are used by firms to manage risk. Go/no decisions on projects. Investments. And as financial professionals, depending on your functional area, it's important to get current, up-to-date, real-time knowledge of what's going on in the market. Mike mentioned some of the internal collaboration software. So Chatter is another example. He used Yammer earlier. These are internal collaboration sites. So, for example, if you've got employees, sales folks who are working on a sales initiative, they can collaborate within the company using the software. You can also pull that data out or record those conversations so that you can get information about, what did we do when sales went well, when they went poorly, etc. Point of sale data, obviously important, but it's becoming even more interesting now that we've got mobile apps and mobile purchasing. Because now we've got geographic data, we've got even more information about customers. So making sure to track the information that's coming out of these 500,000 apps that are available. You've got LinkedIn. 80% of marketing departments are checking LinkedIn each day as part of their intelligence activities. You've got blog sites, Twitter, YouTube, lots of different places to get information out there. We've also got weather data. So collection of this kind of data is critical for companies who respond to weather events, sell seasonal products, or correlate customer attendance with the weather forecast. You've also got Google with Google Maps and geographic information. So the takeaway from all these new data sources is that there really is a large world of data, and it can all, with the tools that have come out in the last 5 years and the capabilities, can all be harnessed and used for business intelligence. So, next slide. Lots of data sources out there, but the information isn't always available. Companies have invested in business intelligence and analytics, but at all levels, from business leaders to analysts, there's still challenges in harnessing all of the data out there to make decisions. So from a recent IBM study that we looked at, 1 in 3 managers still frequently making decisions without all the information they need. 1 in 2 don't have access to the information even in their own organization. The information exists, they don't have access to it. And then in the third, there's a trend in predictive analytics which provides fact-based, predictive analysis of future activity. That might mean customer behavior or market patterns. And business leaders are saying, we need more of this predictive information to be able to make decisions. So the data is out there. There's analytic solutions that are more powerful and cost-effective as ever, which can factor into your plan to give organizations the information that it needs. So, everybody on this call is financially oriented. Good information isn't just good for the sake of having good information. There has to be quantifiable returns that come out of it. And we pulled another study from IBM, about the ROI and the benefit that the analytics can have. Companies have been taking advantage of this stuff since it came out. It's not new. But what is important is the ability to do it effectively and also adapt and scale it for these new data sources that's going to drive competitive advantage and resulting revenue. So looking at this study, you can see the blue bars are companies that have invested in business analytics, which in the IBM study is showing 33% more revenue growth, 12 times more profit growth, and 32% more return on invested capital. So pretty good figures in terms of the returns from business analytics. When I was creating this slide, I was thinking about the movie Moneyball, where I thought it was a great movie that really highlighted, and book, that highlighted how much analytics can do for you, where the Oakland A's baseball team basically analyzed a ton of game and player stats to figure out how to get the most hits, which they determined gave them the most wins. And they could get the most hits per dollar to stay competitive with teams like the Yankees that had significantly greater budgets. So for them, ROI was huge, and they ended up doing very well in their season. The new techniques drove competitive advantage for them then, but probably an industry standard on other baseball teams today. So of course they need to be able to analyze the data in even more ways to stay ahead of that curve. So this slide is really a special call out to some of the opportunities within social media, both externally and internally. And Mike and I, we really grew up in the email generation, but that's really moved to the true mobile and social media generation. It's becoming big business, and it's a huge opportunity. And as I talked about earlier, like for example with healthcare, there's a lot of traditional business-to-business companies that need to pay attention to the consumer channel. And a lot of that's done through social media. So externally, that's collecting and reacting to consumer-generated data, review sites, Facebook, Twitter, etc. As well, it's providing customers with new interaction points. So like my younger brother was telling me about this Domino's pizza order tracker. Lets you not only order a pizza over an app, but you can track the status of your order in real time, whether it's in the oven or it's in delivery. And that kind of stuff, him telling me about that and the fact that he uses it, it's a good example of how these kinds of interaction points, driven by data oftentimes, are real drivers of customer loyalty. And they're getting, and that loyalty is getting more and more difficult to create. So leads into considering, what interaction points the customers of your company are looking for. Even in a B2B business, it might be providing online systems to let customers know about an order, for example. And back to Mike's discussion of dynamic enterprise, it's important to scan and react to what consumers are doing and what they want. As well, Mike also mentioned Glassdoor. So this is a website, I'm sure many of you on the call have heard of it, but it's a place where employees can go and share salary information, reviews on their employers, and it's a place where employers really need to pay attention to. Their employees are rating their own company. It's important in order to attract top talent and make sure you're not having an attrition problem. Pay attention to what your employees are saying. In the next slide, we'd like to talk a little bit about how companies are leveraging some of the unstructured data sources we talked about earlier. The first example is in manufacturing. So this is a case where a company was taking advantage of diagnostic data about machines and service repair notes on those machines that they were selling and servicing. So more and more equipment has built-in or add-on diagnostic capability, just tracks it internally. But the diagnostic data and of course service repair notes tend to be mostly unstructured. It's about diagnostic information might come in many different forms from different machines. And service notes are, hey, I replaced this, or this machine needs repair at some point down the road, etc. So in order to use the data, it has to be processed and enriched. That means trying to understand what that service tech was trying to tell you. So analyzing that data. The company collected all of the diagnostic and service information, processed it, and they used it to more efficiently manage service professional time. So for example, if a tech was going out to visit one machine, he also knew that there was 2 other machines on that site that were due up for a particular service, and they could do it right then, so they didn't have to make a separate trip. More importantly, customer satisfaction increased significantly, even above, so as an advantage that's even probably greater than the cost savings from service techs. In financial services, analytics plays a huge role. I worked at a large financial exchange client, and when market events that Mike mentioned, like MF Global or European issues happen, they need to be able to react quickly. That means getting into the information about that event right away. So that could be alerts on the news, alerts on news feeds that something could happen, about predicting that there could be a market issue, which is obviously hard to do, but the more information you have and the quicker you can respond to market events, the better it was for this client. For them as well, I remember when things like that happened, they would all the business unit leaders would line up outside the director's door, and they'd huddle for a day or two, consolidating information and checking the accuracy of their numbers so that they could make decisions. They're working on a project right now to consolidate all of that information across all of the different product lines, the derivatives, foreign exchange, etc., so they can spend that day making decisions rather than compiling the data. And lastly, in marketing, the world has never been really more complicated or fast-moving, with so many new customer touch points in marketing. In this particular case, we worked with a consumer packaged goods firm, which traditionally relied on Nielsen data as their sole source. And the question they had that we worked with them with is, how do we use some additional sources in order to supplement the data that Nielsen was providing them? And that helps figure out what medium is best, web, mobile, apps. How do we figure out how to take, which ads are the most effective per dollar, and which how do you show the customers the right ads? So on all of these use cases, I think for finance professionals, I think the key takeaway here is that the new business analytics solutions not only help increase the efficiency, reduce costs, increase revenue, all the things they're supposed to do, but they also create better intelligence into the budgeting and planning processes. If you're able to know ahead of time and with more accuracy how much things are going to cost, what we can expect out of revenue growth, etc., makes business modeling even easier. So in the next slide, I want to take this one step further. So I want to talk a little bit more in a little bit more detail about what it means to merge structured and unstructured data sources. Again, one of the key themes you're hearing is how to merge these two things together, put context to this unstructured data to make sense of it. So on the left, you'll see our traditional sources, and that includes things like point-of-sale data, pricing data. And then you've got loyalty card activity, and then you've got your promotions and your sales events, mailers, etc. All of this mostly structured data, a little bit of unstructured, but mostly structured. So now to drive some real value out of this, we want to merge this with new unstructured data sources. So for example, call center data. During every call, there's product information mentioned, there's location information, there's sometimes people even mention salesperson's names, as well as the tone, customer angry, were they elated. And all of those calls can be translated or turned into text, and the text can be searched, filtered for keywords. How many times did this word appear? Sentiment analysis. Was this call happy? Was this call about a particular product in a location at this store and it was angry? Well, when you start putting those things together and merging it with your point of sale data, you start to get a fuller picture of what's happening. So as well, on the last part here, analyzing what's said in LinkedIn and Twitter and these different sources by aggregating. There's companies that can help aggregate some of this data out there. So Radian6 or Data Sift can pull down data said about a particular product from particular hashtag, etc., so that you can pull out keyword analysis, etc., and also put that together to get, again, a fuller picture of what's happening. So with that, I'd like to turn it back over to John for another polling question, and then Mike will follow up after that to talk about how to create a plan to leverage some of these new data sources and capabilities.
Great, thanks, Kevin. So here is the next polling question, same as last time. If you're here for CPE credits, you must take this, but even if you're not, we'd love you to take a few moments. The question is, in which area is your organization planning or executing initiatives around leveraging unstructured data or big data? So we'd love to hear about that. Also, a quick reminder, you can ask questions at any time via the question area in your GoToWebinar control panel. We've got one more section of slides, then we will get into our Q&A. So that's coming up very shortly. I'll go ahead and leave this poll open for another 5 seconds. So if you haven't gotten your vote in, please do, and then we'll hop right back into it. Okay. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and close down that second poll, and I will give keyboard and mouse right back to Michael. Michael, please take us away.
All right, thanks, John. Thanks, Kevin. So I think Kevin did a good job of laying out, just that data explosion and all the new types of information that's out there, as well as some of the opportunities that are out there. I mean, it's definitely a very real phenomenon. So the next question, I think would be, how are they doing it? How are these different companies really leveraging analytics and information, to be more of a dynamic enterprise and really focus on, gaining that outsized or outpaced growth? And the answer is they're leveraging a common set of capabilities, across 3 main areas. One of which, you're probably going to be pretty familiar with, and the other 2 are really being driven by this era of big data. The fundamentals really haven't changed, like Kevin said, in terms of the ability to kind of overlay and combine data. What we are seeing is based on the new types of information that are out there, there's really a new set of capabilities that you need to get there. So we'll talk about that now. The first one, which you're all probably pretty familiar with, business intelligence and management reporting, that really has driven the analytics of the business intelligence industry, ever since the advent of ERP systems. Once those came out, BI and these type of systems were, quickly on the heels. And really what that focuses on is, solutions to leverage information that's in the enterprise data warehouse. So lots of challenges around siloed information and combining that data. You probably heard some of those tools, Cognos, Business Objects, other ones that are out there. Probably started doing it in Excel, and then as that got a little bit too cumbersome, started to take on more of these enterprise tools. But what we've seen is that with big data, and being able to leverage all of the data that's out there, it's really these 2 new capabilities that are coming into play. So we're seeing these organizations develop capabilities across really all 3 of these to take advantage of all the different types of information that are out there, as well as deal with some of the challenges that Kevin laid out around volume and variety and velocity, and volatility of information. So it's really capabilities across each of these three primary areas that you're going to need to take advantage of all the different types of information that may be important to you. So what do we mean by each of those? All right, so we've got these three areas. The first, business intelligence. What do you get, or what are you lacking if you don't have these capabilities? Really, it's around answers to questions quickly. So if you think about it, siloed information. I mean, I've definitely been there. I'm sure some of you have as well, where you're manually extracting data from an ERP system, dumping it down into Excel, creating different pivot tables, merging it all together, which leads to questions in the data. Really that ability to just answer questions quickly was a big benefit of these solutions. Also exception reporting, now that you've got the data in one place, let's look at it in a more automated way and start to push information out to people. Things like dashboards to take a horizontal view of the organization and then really drill down into it. The trust, which I just mentioned. One of the big trends that we saw the most success come out of is really role-based reporting and targeting that information. The analogy I like to use there is did some work with PepsiCo, which Pepsi's now kind of merged into one, but it was the bottling and distribution branch. They really went about role-based reporting, and so for the CFO, he would have a dashboard that looked at lots of different areas of the business, looked at people, cost centers, things like that, but really high-level view with the ability to drill in. Whereas one of the tabs was specifically for a distribution center manager, and really just a couple of reports on that tab, just around, hey, where are my guys spending their time and what zones in the distribution center, how many pallets are they picking per hour, how much is getting loaded up on the truck. By really focusing that information, able to see some pretty significant improvements in those pallets picked per hours and the efficiencies, which really had a big impact on the bottom line. But the key really is just, viewing that information in the right context by combining it. With big data and some of the information discovery tools that are out there, you get a different set of capabilities. And so Kevin touched on this with the manufacturing example about the servicing of ATMs, I believe it was. Great story around that one. That company was looking at the machine diagnostic data and the service data, and when they integrated an information discovery capability, because they couldn't get access to all that unstructured and structured information in one place, what they learned that they didn't even know they had was information about their competitors' products. So they were servicing competitors' ATMs, similar type things, check dispensers or check, readers and keyboards and things of that nature. Didn't even know they had information on that. So, the guy actually said, he's like, I didn't even know I had this, but very valuable information. So that's a big part of information discovery and big data, is just knowing what's important and what's not important. Kevin touched on this as well. The structured and unstructured, most of that new information is unstructured. So combining it is really where most of the power is. Looking at customer touch points in conjunction with transactional sales data. Very powerful thing. In order to do that, you need to have the enrichment capabilities to do that, because let's face it, probably 98, 99, maybe 97% of the data out there on things like Twitter and other areas is probably going to be garbage data. So you need to get rid of that and focus in on that very small percentage of a massive amount of data that is important. Another big area with big data is just the customer connections. Mobility is driving a lot of this, but the ability to connect to customers is really changing. We're seeing a lot of activity in that space. So kind of merging that information that's inside and outside your firewall. And as well as distributed computing power, things like Hadoop, making it accessible to organizations of all sizes. There's almost a democratization of the data that we're seeing. So it's something that, no organization can really ignore anymore, because the access is just getting easier and easier. And then on the advanced analytics side, so what are we talking about there? That's your more predictive or your prescriptive actions. What Kevin is saying, that's where we're seeing a lot of desire as well, to say, okay, I'm starting to get a good handle on what did happen, but what should I be doing? So that's things like, in call centers, leveraging information that you have in a very real-time way. What should the next best offer be? And that's call center people that are actually being told, like, hey, this person, based on their transaction history, now that they've been identified, what are they most likely to buy? That's things like fraud detection. With insurance companies, you've got, lots of transactions flowing through, too much for a person really to look at. How do we pick out the ones that are most likely to be fraudulent? So a lot of activity there as well. And we really see these to be more automated and process-focused. You're embedding it into processes which are, running through those transactions and processing those in an automated way, so less human interaction there. And the interesting thing too is they're also often self-learning, so you come up with these statistical models. The technologies that are out there are actually able to look and evaluate, is it a good model? How do we need to tweak it? So, lots of different capabilities, they really do kind of fall into these three different buckets. So then the next question is, what do you need? It'd be great to have all these, right? Just at your fingertips. But the reality is, you probably don't need all of these. So how do we find companies going about, really figuring out what they need to do? And most take a structured process. The companies that do the best job of leveraging analytics to become those dynamic enterprises are really looking at what capabilities do they need from each area, because you're not going to need them all. You don't have budget probably to invest in them all anyways. So they're using more of a structured process to say, look, what's important to the business? Which areas should we address in each of those three buckets? And that's going to determine from a business-based approach of what's important to the organization, which capabilities you're going to invest in first and kind of what your series of initiatives is going to look like. Because if you do it right, you're getting incremental value, let's say in like, sometimes as short as a 2 or 3 month window, typically you want to go for kind of 6 months, where it becomes more of a self-funding process because you're seeing the value of that. So this just gives an outlay of, something you might look at from your as-is capabilities to your to-be capabilities. But let's try and make it a little bit more real with an example. So in this instance, I like these slides in particular because it kind of lays out and it really focuses on the business process and it keeps it simple. So I look at it as kind of a 3-layer cake. So on the left-hand side, you've got a growth initiative. So every company wants to grow. I think that's pretty common across every organization. So how do we do that? At Baker Tilly, we find there's really 5 ways that you can do that. Excuse me. Product and service innovation, market focus and alignment, channel sales effectiveness, your customer and your social experience, and then how you're pricing your products. And what you do is you really pick one of those levers that you want to focus on, and then you look at those 3 layers of the cake and you say, okay, within those, what are the business processes that we can change, alter, introduce to really pull that lever more effectively? And how can we increase the knowledge within that area? And that's going to drive, based on what you determine, what your analytical solution is going to look like, which is the second layer of that cake. So lots of different options, could be supported by a bunch of those capabilities that we laid out. And then that's going to drive what information you need, right? So you've got all those different sources of information, what's important, what's not, how do you target it? I mentioned those kind of fundamentals don't change. I think it looks, nice when you kind of take a slice of the pie and say, okay, what does that actually look like? So if you're going to go after channels and sales effectiveness, you've got a number of different business processes that you can look at. You can look at call center ops, you can look at your sales force effectiveness, around customer convenience, different channels, distributors, bunch of which aren't even listed here, right? You want to focus in and get the business sponsorship about what are we going to improve, right? Because it's always people, process, and technology that you're going after. So you've got to start with the process and what's going to be most effective. That's then going to drive your analytical solution. So it could be something like customer segmentation and who to target. It could be the upsell, cross-sell example that I mentioned. It could be getting, leveraging social commerce to get better customer insight. Anchoring is something that we're seeing is more relevant. I was reading somewhere that it takes, outside of a major purchasing decision, it takes people about 2 days to decide what to buy in the retail CPG space. So, the anchoring of your brand, and your product is very important, just that it's recent in their mind when they're making that buying decision. And then those analytical solutions are going to determine what do you need, right? Is it call center notes? Is it social data? Is it survey data? Is it transactional data? Again, those kind of unstructured and structured pieces of information. So what role can finance play? Like I said, I'm a CPA. I kind of come from that background. To me, in a really unique position, because they really are the keepers of the data. They're one of the functions within the organization or groups within the organization that really understand the data, excuse me, and where it can be impactful. And this insight, and the ability to understand which areas of the business need attention, what don't, what should be ignored, what's going to have a financial impact to the business, makes it only more important that finance gets involved in some of those initiatives. And traditionally there's challenges in that, right? Old finance, very transaction processed. A lot of challenges around, just responding to requests for information, manual ad hoc, requests for information. So, lots of challenges there in terms of freeing up the time, but we've seen with some systems integration, time is freeing up more, kind of getting out of some of that Excel hell has been a big driver of that. And they're really starting to interject themselves more into the decision-making process and how you're using information, And I think that's the key to being able to do that is really, pick where you want to focus because you can't do everything. Those areas that are going to be impactful, whether that's customer or whether that's supply chain or whatever it may be, that's the first step is understanding where you want to focus because you can't be everywhere. And then really start to get in there and look at the information requirements and what information would be good for those decision makers to have. Because again, uniquely positioned, you kind of own the data and really have an insight into what's going to be impactful to the business. And then, work with IT or whatever other department to come up with the best kind of roadmap, to integrate these capabilities within the organization. So just about wrapping up, just a few key considerations to leave you with. I'd say the first is that change is always going to be there. You've got to embrace it. Are you a dynamic enterprise? If you're not, what are you doing to get there? There's lots of different ways to become one. But a key component to it is definitely going to be your information capabilities. Technology costs, I alluded to this, they've really plummeted, the advent of the cloud and other technologies that are out there. Capabilities are really accessible to organizations of all sizes now, and that's something that can't be ignored anymore. Don't forget 80% of the new information is going to be in non-traditional formats. The information landscape, like I say here, is rapidly changing, and it requires a different set of capabilities to compete effectively. So I'll leave you with it. This is one of my favorite quotes, because I think it stood the test of time. It actually gets more relevant, as the years kind of tick by. Is that, it's not the strongest that survives, or the most intelligent that survives. It's the one that's going to be the most adaptable to change. And information really plays a key part in that, and that's something that's not going to change anytime soon, as you can see by the person that said it. So John, that's it. I'll turn it back over to you now.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael and Kevin. What we're going to do is go into the third and final polling question, which I will launch right now. And there we go. Okay, so once again, required for everyone with CPE. If you're not here for CPE, we'd still love you to take it. We are running a little short on time, so I think we'll take a quick peek at these poll results as soon as we're done with this one, and we'll see if we can get a question or two in. And then we will get everyone out of here on time. I promise that. So we'll leave this open for another 15 seconds or so. The question is, which area of your organization do you believe the Office of Finance can have the most impact on when leveraging data, big data? And I'll leave that out for another 5 seconds. We'll get our last votes in. Fantastic. Well, look, we thank everyone for participating in these polls. As promised, I'm going to go ahead and turn this around. We will start with the first poll, and we'll see what our speakers think about this data. So this was, which of the following major functions of an organization have the most difficulty leveraging information? And finance is right there on top, and then sales and marketing next. Michael, what do you think about this? Is this more or less what you would expect?
It is. It always depends on the audience for sure, but it's the one thing that I think is challenging and hard about analytics, but also very interesting, is that you can apply information to really anything, any process, any function, any department, you name it. I've probably worked with some, this industry and that industry. So I think that's probably pretty accurate, which I think is why it's only that much more important that finance kind of interjects into what is important and where do you really need it. Because some are going to be more important and more impactful than others.
It's interesting. As I look at this data, I think finance is probably most adept at leveraging information, and they do it more frequently and better than any other part of the organization. which would, possibly lend one to believe that finance would have the least difficulty. But I guess the difficulty comes in actually that's the demand. You're the people that the organization turns to.
Yeah,
when they have problems.
Oh, sorry, go on. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, and therefore.
I was going to say it's a response time. Like we hear that a lot from finance. I get this request, I need it yesterday, the information's in a lot of different places, so it kind of hits on what Kevin pointed out to the access and, just the ability to leverage it and respond to, what are quick requests.
Right. Next one, this is interesting. In which area is your organization planning or executing initiatives around leveraging unstructured data or big data? Some in finance, some in sales and marketing. Of course, the big one here is no activities going on. This massive amounts of information are exploding around most companies, and yet, at least on this call, maybe half of the folks are not doing anything with it yet. Kevin, is this what you guys are seeing amongst your client base at this point, or how are people getting into this?
Well, I think that the using unstructured data and big data is, it's the next wave here. But a lot of companies are kind of waiting to see, what are some of the next technologies. Some are not. I think this looks about right. It also makes sense that folks on the phone are in finance and sales and marketing. You're going to know more about the fact that your functional area is looking at these kinds of initiatives. Human resources, another area we would expect to see it as well, in customer service and looking through call center data, things like that. But given the nature of the folks on the phone, this makes sense. So, yeah, I think this is what we're seeing.
Yeah, I'd add to that. The surprising ones to me are the customer service and human resources. It doesn't surprise me that people aren't aware of what's going on out there and that sales and marketing tends to be leading because that's where a lot of the activity is. But customer service in particular is a big opportunity. And then in human resources, that's still emerging, but is going to be a big point in terms of just how people kind of communicate with some of the social collaboration tools. That's an area that really recently we've started to see more of the traction in.
Interesting. Okay. And then we'll take a quick look at our last polling question. Which area of the organization do you believe the Office of Finance can have the most impact on while leveraging big data? Michael, any surprise here? Looks like we've hit the two big items, sales and cost.
Yeah, the only surprises I thought cost would be higher in this one, just because usually when I'm talking to finance people, very in tune to where the cost centers are, the opportunities to cut costs, without, materially impacting the organization. So I would have thought cost cutting would be a little bit higher. I think the biggest opportunity is on the sales and marketing side, and again, kind of customer service. Maybe those kind of merge together when looking at this. But, I'm surprised. I thought cost cutting would be a little bit higher on that one.
Okay. And then we have time for one question, I think, here, just in order to get everyone out on time. And this question, Michael, I'll address it to you and ask Kevin for his input as well. On the second poll, we saw about half of folks at least weren't aware of big data projects. And I wonder if there's an impression out there that big data or sort of corralling and managing unstructured data is too expensive, too difficult to implement at most companies. Is that true these days, or how does one get into this and get into this quickly and easily like we can with a lot of other cloud apps these days, for instance?
Sure. So there's a bunch of, I'd say third-party aggregators, so companies like Radian6, Data Sift, there's a bunch of other ones that work on the enrichment process, and that's what we're seeing to be, something that you can definitely leverage. And the returns are actually pretty big. I mean, I was watching this digital presentation about, he's the director of digital media for Campbell's. I can't remember, what his name is exactly, but they talk about really return on amazing, and it's more around the social commerce aspect, and they reference a couple of things about, sales and marketing activities, and then putting it out there and measuring the social impact of it. it's ridiculous some of the returns that he's kind of laying out there. So, I think there's opportunities. I think there's just a lot of confusion, right? So there's 48% that or 49% that weren't aware of any activities. I think it's because people are still getting into the space. There's definitely some early leaders that are seeing some good returns on it, and people are kind of waiting to see how that shakes out. I think that's part of it.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think one thing that Mike and I prescribe as well is that you don't have to jump in a gigantic project. There's ways to take on small steps and plot out a 2, 3 month, 4 month project where you decide, all right, let's try this out. Let's try to get some data. Let's try to merge it with our traditional data set. You don't have, it does not have to be a full-blown project. Once those pilot projects start developing some successes, and the executives are seeing and leadership, seeing the returns on that, that opens up the door for, all right, let's see what else we can do with this. So a good way to test the waters and move in slowly.
Gotcha. Great. Well, wonderful. Thank you very much. A quick piece of housekeeping, and then we will do a couple thank yous and let everyone go. First off, just a quick reminder, you will be prompted to take a short survey. Please give us your 60 seconds. We always want to know how to do better the next time, and that survey helps us get there. Plus, if you'd like us to help connect you directly with either Michael or Kevin, that's just a mouse click away in that survey, and we're more than happy to do that. If you have any questions at all about CPE credit, please contact Chris Brower. You can see her email right there on the screen. And of course, please join us at Proformative.com, where we're having conversations about this and thousands of other topics all the time in the realm of finance, accounting, and treasury. A great thank you to our two speakers, Kevin and Michael. Thanks so much for your time and bringing all of your great experience to bear this morning. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, John.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
You bet. Our pleasure to have you here. Finally, a thanks to Baker Tilly for sponsoring this event and allowing us to make this and everything we do at Proformative completely free to all of our users. We love that. And we hope you do too. And hope to see you again at another event or online at Proformative.com. And with that, I will bid everyone a wonderful week. I will shut down the webinar now, and then you'll immediately be taken to the post-event survey. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great week. Take care.